This lecture we're going to learn a tool called project. So go to homework and open project. For example, this curve right here is perfectly on the surface. This is not easy if you just draw, because there's no way that we can draw a curved line perfectly on a curvy surface. So how did we achieve this is by project. We could draw very easily. Maybe I do a different one. I do a star. I use the number of star. I use 10, and maybe I do a little smaller so that it could be directly projected to the shape. Projection is, this is down below. Let's move this guy away. Okay, so this is a shape that eventually we're going to project onto the surface. Project has a requirement is you have to use the correct view. So if you want to project, for example, this shape, that I have to use the top view rather than other views. So let's look at where this thing is, the star. Maybe I'll just move on top of it, although it doesn't matter where it is. You can actually project it even it's below. So click on the tool called project. If you do not expand the toolbar, the first tool is to project. However, you can certainly expand the toolbar. Previously, we learned duplicate borders, so now we do project. Click on the toolbar, select a curve and point to project. So we select the curve, press enter, select surface, and you need to keep in mind all this we're doing that has to be done on the top view. Press enter. So we already projected. If we look at the other views, we actually projected to the curvy surface both on top and at the bottom. So that's project. Of course, let's say if let's say we're doing project, the same projection, if we use the front view, it would not be successful. We could try, select the curve, press enter, and select the surface and press enter. However, nothing happens because in this view there's no overlapping, so you couldn't do with different view. However, you can probably do something. Let's say I have a circle. If that's the case, I can project. With the circle selected, I click on project, and then I select on the surface and I press on enter. So in this case, we generated another projection, but through front surface. What this will help us to do is, maybe we hide the original shape, is once we done projection, we can actually maybe trim off, which happens here, and create some openings to a rather sophisticated shape. So if we do a trim, select trim, select the cutting objects, which for this case is a star, press enter, and select the object to trim. So is I click on here. So we trimmed off the top one. So let's look at the bottom one. And we could do the same to trim. Select cutting object, press enter, and select the shape. So we did a trimming for it. So project is pretty much it. It's simple and easy. Of course, there are other options such as to pull to the surface. This is a little bit different than to project. For example, we can keep selecting a circle. In this case, it's not the circle, but the original circle. which I believe, I delete this one, which I believe is somewhere here. Okay, so move this circle out and try to use a different tool is to pull to the surface, to pull the curve to the surface. Click on the toolbar, and we probably should do the same, which I would use my front view. So that's a curve that we want to pull to the surface, and then we select the surface, then we press enter. What happened is this is much smaller. It's smaller than projection because as we pull, looks like the shape is reduced in size. So there's a little bit of variation or difference between project and pull to the surface. And with the same file, I'm going to quickly introduce just a few of the other tools. For example, this is this shape that we have now. We could duplicate the edge. And in this case, once we select the tool, we could select particular edge that we want to duplicate. Yeah, in this case, we just duplicate the edge, which kind of look like a curvy line. Another tool we already introduced is to duplicate the border. So click on duplicate the border and click on the shape. Press enter. And we pretty much duplicate all the lines that's on the surface. However, those lines are all polylines. So if you want them sometimes to function as individual line, you have to explode. The next one is to duplicate the face border. This is almost interchangeable as the other two as to duplicate the border. It pretty much does the same thing. Okay, and the next two is extract isocurve. We sort of explained what isocurve is. Let's do maybe a tube. So the isocurve are the yellow lines that you can see that's mostly invisible if you only look at the solid shape. In this case, it is visible that we can see some of them. We could also remember that when we go to property, that if we select the object, make sure the object is selected, otherwise you wouldn't see a lot of the options. There's one of the options called the isocurve density. We could change and have more of the isocurve. We could use this tool right here to extract isocurve from the shape. So yeah, it looks like it's doing that. As long as you click, it will generate some kind of isocurve. We probably do not need too much changing the isocurve density. That works already. So basically means the density, the display density has nothing to do with extracting the isocurve. So we remove it, make it 0, so it's easier to see. Click on isocurve again, extract isocurve, and select the object. We could actually also do a different direction. So this direction is vertical, and it will extract circles out of it. So we could also change direction as U, and if we click on it, there's a U and a V and both. We could do V. U and V you can sort of understand as X and Y. So if we do V, then we will come up with isocurve that's a different direction. Or we could do, click on direction again, and we could do both. So if both, then we will have both isocurve generated. So that's isocurve, generate some isocurve. The isocurve can be interesting if you have some kind of a shape and you created, for example, a cone. If we generate some isocurve, so far I'm generating both directions. Yeah, with the isocurve that we could probably continue to build on and become a design element. So that's the isocurve. Expand the toolbar again and go to the next one is to extract wireframe. This probably has to do with the density of isocurve. If we use the same tube and change the density of isocurve so that we have many of them, and if we extract wireframe, so as you can see, we extracted a quite elaborated wireframe. So that's extract wireframe. That has something to do with the density display. So if we, for example, this one, if we extract the wireframe, it probably just a few lines. So extract the wireframe, something like this. However, if we change the density, first we should select the correct object, which is the comb, not the wireframe, and change the density and apply more of it. And then when we extract the wireframe, then it becomes something more sophisticated. There's another tool, it's called contour. That's the last tool that I'm going to introduce for this lecture. Contour is something really interesting. For example, I'm going to use some of the tools that you haven't really used in the past. And I'm going to create a shape. I will open a new file. I will create some kind of, let's say this is reception desk. Is a curvy one. So I draw some lines. And I'm going to extrude the curvy line and make it sort of looking like a reception desk. So I will go to Surface Toolbar and click on Extrude. As I extrude, there's one more thing that I like to point to you is a selection called cap. Because when we extrude without changing anything, we end up with some kind of like a four walls. But it's not a solid. So that's not really what we want. So I delete that. I'll do another extrusion, which I will use the cap. So still extrusion, and go to the option and click on cap, and the no will become yes. So cap basically cap the top and the bottom. So it made it into a solid instead of individual surfaces. So become a solid. So with this, I could apply something called the contour. Contour, you can understand it as a slicing tool. I will demonstrate to you. So I select the tool called contour, and I select the base point. For my case, I'm just going to use the bottom of the shape, and then I move up to the top, which I hope will give me a straight line. So that basically decides the direction. Of course, you can always imagine this as a slicing tool. It's pretty much like extrusion. You can slice also according to different direction, which we can try later. So I will select this as my direction. And the distance so far, if we don't change it, is 50. I'm not so sure how big are those, but maybe let me change it so that it's a little bit smaller. We type in 10. So actually 10 is pretty big as well, because it looks like I'm slicing my shape. I only have 2 of them generated, and it didn't look quite clear, so I'm going to redo it. Select the object, press enter, and now I'm going to give a base point and basically also decide the direction of how do I slice. So the direction is from bottom to top. And the distance of the contour, I'm going to select 1. This is according to the size of my object. And yeah, this is a successful contour which slices the shape and generated some kind of a wireframe that we can later use for different purpose. For example, this could be a texture, or we could apply different materials. Yeah, we have a lot of choice to do after we generated the contour. Let's do another contour. Click on contour, base point, or the base point doesn't have to be on the shape. I could say this is my base point, and because I'm basically deciding the direction, but I could also decide to do a contour following this direction, and I will leave it as 1 still, and then this time I generate a contour like this. One thing that is very common is wrong size, because you try to slice something, but you cannot slice a small object by using very big distance. If let's say, let's look at the dimension of this linear dimension, and the dimension is only 19. So if I try to do a contour, select the object and select the direction, and if I type in 20, which will not generate any contour because it's bigger, then our object is only the bottom one is generated. The next line, if would work, is probably somewhere above our object. So doing contour, the distance or the size of the shape and the distance between different contour lines is a very important element, and it sometimes could cause some confusions.